Fantastic. Slowly, everybody is going to be coming in for our last Newton Series class. We are so thrilled to host a Cal and California icon, probably a sports icon also. Leigh Steinberg will have his introduction in just a moment as everybody gathers. We are really lucky, in addition to having Leigh join us this evening, we also have 4 fantastic Cal students. The cohort, as I've mentioned a couple times, has just been incredible this semester. The introductions have been great, really no pressure, Veda. And we thought it would be fun to round out the semester hearing the questions that the students have from the beginning. And as always, you have the opportunity to add your questions during our Q&A session closer to 6 o'clock. I'm just going to wait a few more minutes as we get a couple more participants. Leigh, as you can imagine, people are always a little bit slow on Cal time. We're going into final season, so people will be coming on soon. Veda, let's give it just one more minute before we start with the introduction, if that's okay. Again, welcome everybody to the A. Richard Newton Distinguished Innovator Lecture Series. We are so thrilled for our closing lecture to feature Cal grad and really iconic sports agent, Leigh Steinberg, who's featured in this picture here from his best-selling book in 2015, The Agent. Leigh, I think right now you're in Los Angeles, right?
I'm in Newport Beach.
Oh, Newport Beach. That's right. Fantastic. Then I'm going to wait for one more person to join, and then I will turn it over to you. All right, I think we're good. It is my pleasure to actually introduce who's introducing our keynoter tonight, Veda Santos. Veda is a third-year cognitive and data science student, and she's studying entrepreneurship. She'll be getting her SCET certificate. You will also hear from 3 other students, Arav, Artem, and Francesca, as we go through the evening, as well as our keynote. But I'm going to stop my share and highlight you, Veda, and highlight Leigh as you do your introduction.
All right, thank you so much. Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Veda, and I am so excited to introduce the final speaker of the Fall 2022 Newton Lecture Series. Today's guest is one of the greatest sports agents of all time, Leigh Steinberg. With 8 #1 overall picks, this NFL-recognized game changer has represented 12 Pro Football Hall of Fame members and set many records over an incredible 5-decade career. He's negotiated over $2 billion in contracts for the athletes that he's represented, including Steve Young, Drew Bledsoe, Cordell Stewart, Warren Moon, Patrick Mahomes, and my personal favorite, Ben Roethlisberger. On top of his work with Steinberg Sports, ushering in new levels of excellence on the field, his story off the field is just as remarkable. Steinberg was the real-life inspiration for the cinema classic Jerry Maguire, as well as technical consultant for Any Given Sunday and For the Love of the Game. A graduate of UC Berkeley, go Bears, Steinberg has earned degrees in political science and a JD from Berkeley Law, and was even elected ASUC president during the height of the Vietnam War. Steinberg has put his writing chops to use with multiple bestseller books about the process of negotiation and his strict professional and personal code of ethics. In addition, Steinberg's philanthropic efforts have been an enduring feature of his career, most notably through the Steinberg Leadership Institute, a nationwide program run by the Anti-Defamation League, preparing students to fight racism and inequality. With an incredible comeback story, Steinberg's story is one of triumph, dedication, and success with integrity. Without further ado, I am so excited to speak to Mr. Leigh Steinberg. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure and privilege to talk to my own fellow students and alums, having spent 7 great years of my life at UC Berkeley.
Amazing. Well, I'd love to kick off the first question of our moderated panel, if that's okay with you, Ms. Howell. Yeah. All right, great. So I want to start off with a question about your book, Winning with Integrity, Getting What You Want Without Selling Your Soul. This was such a fun read, and it was really packed with so many anecdotes and practical advice, like setting your limits before negotiation starts, never underestimating the other party, and even little things like taking in the details of your physical surroundings. So I was just wondering, how did you incorporate these principles of negotiation into your behavior as a student or an early professional? For those of us that are just starting out in our careers, do you have any advice for getting what we're worth when we're just starting out?
I think the most important skill in life is listening. If you can draw out another human being and cut below the surface and peel back the layers of the onion so that you get deeper and deeper and establish an atmosphere of trust so that eventually you get to understand someone else's deepest anxieties and fears and their greatest hopes and dreams, and be able to put yourself in the other person's heart and mind and see the world the way they see it. Then you have the ability, whether it's negotiating, recruiting, maintaining a friendship, working with a client, to really understand someone. And it involves understanding their value system, which is how do they really feel about short-term economic gain, long-term economic security, family values, spiritual values, geographical location, autonomy. If you can evaluate your own values and understand what's most critical to you, and then get into the mind of the other person and understand what really is critical to them, it makes the whole process of interacting easier.
Amazing. Thank you. Any other practical tips for how we can apply this during things like job interviews or interviewing for graduate school?
Well, again, if you can get into the mind of the person that's interviewing you, the first key is research. Can you understand everything about that business, that industry, what they're looking for? And then can you get into the mind of the interviewer and think about what's critical to that person? And then can you step outside the square? So I'll give you an example. I get resumes by the thousands every year. One time, somebody sent an issue of Sports Illustrated, which is the biggest sports magazine. Only this issue had a picture of a young man and myself on the front cover. And they used the font, they used the type size, they used the pictures. And every article in it was about how our firm had been enhanced because we hired this young fellow. And so it looked just like a Sports Illustrated. So this showed me creativity. It showed me use of advertising skills and promotional skills. It showed everything you would ever need to use the job, to be great at the job. And it stood out. So the question is, how do you distinguish yourself from every other competitor? And how do you create a unique profile? Well, in the current world, you can use audio-visual presentations. You can use audio-visual skills. How are you going to distinguish yourself from everybody else? Because here's the key. If you're interchangeable, fungible, modular, you will be replaced or you will never get the job in the first place. How do you get into the head of that person and put together a game plan that looks better? So here'd be another example. I was down speaking at Baylor, and they have the Dr. Pepper Hall of Fame there. Well, I happen to love Diet Dr. Pepper. So at any rate, I'm talking to the students about that. And about a week later, a bottle of Diet Dr. Pepper shows up at my office. Only instead of starting in 1888 when Dr. Pepper did, this one starts in 1975 when my career started. And you turn to the back of it, and it's got all the ingredients and has perseverance 100%, loyalty 100%, creativity 100%, work ethic 100%. And on the front, it has a picture of this fellow and me. And it's clever, and it responded to all of our needs, and we hired him. So my point is, how can you use your creativity, having researched the other person, understanding a little bit about what they're looking for, and then figure out a way to elevate yourself from every other applicant to be the person that creates an impression.
Great. Thank you so much for those examples. I feel like that really clarified it, and maybe I'll make a super creative resume as well in the future. Changing gears a little bit, you attribute a lot of your success to the values that your parents instilled in you at a young age. And one really cute anecdote that stuck out to me was the weekly family meetings you would have with your parents and your brothers called the Muttonhead Club, and the principles that you learned about conflict resolution. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit more about what the club was, what it meant to you, and how you've used those lessons going forward throughout your professional life.
So my parents established a club called the Muttonheads Club, and we had weekly meetings, and one person was the president, and one person VP, and one was the sergeant of arms, and one was the secretary, and one was the treasurer. Our great motivation was whatever the dessert was at the after the meeting, but and we used Rogers' rules of order. And one of the things that was stressed was conflict resolution. So when you got angry at another person or you were upset, you were allowed to talk about their behavior and how it affected you. You were not allowed to say, you always, you never, you're a bad person, you're a terrible, you terrible, and all the rest of that, because that would have permanently scarred your relationship with the other person. There were limits to how far you could go in expressing your disappointment or anger. And you needed to resolve that issue then, not go to sleep with unresolved anger or differences, wake up the next morning and act as if everything was normal. You needed to do it right then and not go to sleep angry. So you learned how to settle disputes, that it was okay to say, I didn't appreciate your behavior, it affected me this way. Not okay to say, you're always a bad person, you're a bad person, you always do this, blah, 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 blah. And so it was conflict resolution. And we also learned systems and how to run meetings and how to engage with other people in a systematic way, and how to play every role you could possibly play in an organization.
Great. That's really powerful. And I hope that all of us can take away those lessons of how to really get to the heart of a conflict without bad-mouthing the other person in the process. So thanks for that. Passing it on to the next panelist.
Rob, do you want to just introduce yourself real quick?
Sure. So thanks for joining us, Mr. Steinberg. And my name is Arav. I'm a second year at Berkeley and very excited for this panel. Very interested in all of your work in your career. And yeah, I would just like to begin starting off with a question about the changing landscape of college athletics and how you've approached it from a business standpoint. So given the developments of NIL and the rapidly changing world of college athletics, how has it impacted the way you conduct business in terms of when you approach athletes, how you enter the process of representation earlier in someone's career, maybe when they're a little bit less mature or less developed as an athlete? How have you gone about that, especially given it's changed so much in the recent years?
So I think the only constant in the business world is change. And so what you want to do is to read as much as you can, watch as much as you can in terms of smart television, and be aware of as much as you can in terms of information so you can anticipate the changes that are coming and be able to adapt to them. So in collegiate sports for years and years, athletes were governed by rules that said they had to be amateurs. And while they could talk to agents, they couldn't do two things. They couldn't take something of value from an agent, nor could they agree to be represented by while they had eligibility remaining. And they had to live on the scholarship check. Anything more coming from sources was considered making them a professional. So California passed a rule in about 3 years ago called SB 206 that said California athletes could hire a marketing agent to market their name, image, and likeness and make commercial deals for them. And that scared the colleges in other states because they thought everybody would end up going to California schools. And so in the summer of 2021, the NCAA passed a rule that said students at all schools could take advantage of marketing agents and they could brand them, which is to create websites, to create logos, to create a presence for Twitter and TikTok and every one of the social media outlets, and try to create the as much profile as possible and brand as possible. And brand is how many people can recognize a name out of 1,000. If they can do that, can they put a identification to it, that this is a football player, that this is a baseball player, that this is a recording artist. And then they could go ahead and market themselves. Well, no one knew exactly how this would turn out, but what has happened is it's been a veritable explosion. First of all, it had athletes going back in time earlier and earlier in their career. So it's not just college, it's high school. And it pushed back the time. So 13-year-olds were starting to brand and market themselves, and they were starting to do deals. So for the concept of representation, normally for a football player, it would take them 3 years to be eligible for the NFL draft since they graduated from high school. So I wouldn't talk to a player until that time had come. But now all of a sudden, if you don't talk to a high school football player and he signs with a marketing agent who also represents players, you may never get a chance to talk to him. So Hoag Hospital's over here, just like Cal. And I'm sure that there are agents sitting around maternity wards looking for healthy mothers, right? So the whole age thing has gone earlier and earlier and earlier. And what happened with the rules is it wasn't just football quarterbacks, although Bryce Young from Alabama has made $3.4 million, the quarterback. Caleb Williams from SC has made $2.2 million, but it ended up being female athletes who were in Olympic sports, a gymnast, a swimmer. It ended up with Phil Knight giving every athlete at the University of Oregon a stipend. Jack in the Box gave 15 athletes with the first name Jack stipends. And the 21st player at the University of Alabama football got a deal, and it's virtually exploded. The other thing that's happened is that alumni of particularly big institutions have banded together in what are called collectives, and they have funneled money through their businesses that they own to schools. So one athlete in a transfer portal went from Pittsburgh to SC, and he got $2 million in NIL guarantees. So it's being used in recruiting. And alums from schools like Ohio State and Notre Dame and Alabama and Texas and SC are able now to offer millions of dollars in NIL potential to players to come recruit. So you're seeing that the Power 5 conferences are pulling away from the rest of athletics, and eventually you won't have an NCAA because those big Power 5 conferences will negotiate their own television contracts. So this is a massive restructure of everything that we've known about college athletics for years and years. And you just saw SC and UCLA pull out of the Pac-12 conference. This affects Cal Athletics because it affects the money coming to the schools. They defend it from the standpoint that the extra TV money by going to the Big Ten can support lesser sports that are non-income sports, that will support women's volleyball at SC or UCLA, and they may make $60 million more. But the lesson for you all is that you have to keep your eye on the changes developing and the future changes developing in the field you're going into, because some of you may work in jobs that don't exist right now. Some of you may end up working in fields that are not developed now. And the pace of change now is not linear anymore, it's exponential. So that as we have miniaturization, it creates concepts that don't just go up 6%, 4%, 3%, 2%, they just explode and go over and over and over again. So in biomed and engineering and technology, we're seeing this massive rate of change. So you have to be on top of it to be able to move in all of these different fields. And so for me, what are the new sports that are coming? Is it pickleball? You know, esports is exploding. And all of a sudden you have colleges offering esport majors and esport teams are playing. And so here's a field that didn't exist.
Thank you. That's really valuable. I very much appreciate that. I'm wondering if at any other point in your career, both as a man in sports versus as a student, any point you've had to make a pivot or had to adapt to, kind of a changing landscape that's not this NIL, anything you can think of?
So the first year after I'd done Bartkowski, I went out and I talked to dozens of different athletes. And it turned out that I had an okay year, but I didn't sign players at the same level as Bartkowski. And I realized that I needed to make an adjustment because what I was offering was a practice based on the concept of role modeling. And I was talking to athletes about returning to the high school community to help shape them and setting up a scholarship fund or retracing their roots, going back to the college and setting up some form of a scholarship and bonding with the alums who can be great mentors and help you in a second career. And then going to the pro level and finding a problem an athlete had and setting up a charitable foundation that had the leading business figures, political figures, and community leaders on a board that would execute a program. And I was looking for especially bright, socially conscious young athletes that would relate to that, who knew they could leave a legacy and they could make a difference in the world, and who were going to be ambitious for second career. Well, that was a very narrow model. And it meant I had to profile those athletes and families that would produce that type of player who would be receptive. So I had to totally alter who I was talking to and find a profile where if I was talking to that sort of athlete who would relate to it, then I might sign 80% of the players. And if I was talking to the general mass of athletes, I might sign 10% of the players. So I had to completely alter what I was doing.
That makes sense. And just to quickly ask, do you feel that your portfolio of athletes now fit within those constraints? They fit within those more socially conscious athletes and people?
Right. So I won't take an athlete like Warwick Dunn, just put the 200th single mother in the first housing they'll ever own by making the down payment and moving the family in. And we have the athlete's message. So Lennox Lewis, the heavyweight champion, cut a public service announcement in boxing that said, "Real men don't hit women." And that could do more to trigger imitative behavior in rebellious adolescents than 1,000 authority figures ever could. So it's athletes triggering imitative behavior and changing values, or Oscar De Loy and Steve Young, prejudice is foul play. So we can attack problems like bullying or sex trafficking or domestic violence or the environment or racism by having athletes change the culture. So I can go into a high school where kids are being bullied and have a big macho athlete teach the high school athletes how to put their arms around someone who may have a hair lip or is overweight or is from a certain background. And that can change the culture of that high school real fast.
That's really impressive. Thank you so much. Really appreciate the responses. Thank you. I'll pass it off to the next panelist.
Okay.
Leigh, Artem is asking the next question, but I wanted to kind of let you know that it's challenging for Artem to ask this question. So you've been so incredibly generous with us, and it's incredible what you're doing for not only athletes, but for high school students. So Artem, with that, I kind of wanted to introduce you and add the spotlight. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you so much, Vicky. Yeah, and I guess I'm very impressed. I'm still a little impressed by the idea of like people other than authorities changing the values and culture real fast. I think this is very profound. I want to change gears a little bit and ask about struggles in general. So you've been quite open about your struggles and your sort of demons. And I guess I want to ask broadly, and then maybe specify things like alcohol and other things. What have you learned from those experiences, in a broad sense, and also what got you into that and how did you get yourself out, right? And are there several sides to this question? And like, what's your, I guess, overall, looking back, what would you advise people and share?
So there's nothing in business that ever really upset me. I knew every day I would walk in the office, and notwithstanding how well we'd prepared, whatever my best thoughts were, something could go awry. So I had the expectation that there would be new challenges every day. But in my personal life, my two older boys were diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosa, which is an eye disease that led to total blindness. And then my father, who was a rock in my life, died of esophageal cancer. And then we lost the house from mold. And I felt like I was a failure. I had a responsibility to provide a house, protect my father, protect my kids. And I was grandiose in thinking I could do that. And I felt like Gulliver on the beach, tethered down by Lilliputians with them sticking forks in me. And I wanted to numb out, and I turned to alcohol, and that was the right thing. I hadn't, when I was back at Cal, I was one beer Steinberg, so it wasn't something I had my whole life. And we were more interested in herbal substances, and I'll leave it at that. But at any rate, so I succumbed to alcohol. The first challenge you have is to break denial, because addiction's the problem that tells you don't have a problem. So when people say you have a problem, no, not me. So first you have to break that denial. And to do it, you sort of have to hit a bottom, and your life has to be totally unacceptable. So I hit that bottom back in 2010. And then I went into sober living, and I worked a 12-step program, and those worked. So I found a unique fellowship, worked a 12-step program. And the hardest thing is when you're surrounded by destruction and detritus and financial concerns and reputational concerns and everything, it's like, can you find the light at the end of the tunnel? Can you find optimism that somehow things will get better? If you walk into a barn filled with pony poop, can you believe somehow there's a pony in there underneath all that, right? remember that Greek god that kept pushing the ball up the hill? And every time he would, I forget if it was Sophocles, but at any rate, he'd keep pushing the ball up the hill and then it would go back on him and then he'd have to keep pushing it up again and then it would roll back. So can you find a resilience and energy? Fortunately, I was born with a fair amount of optimism. And so in March, I'll be 13 years continuously sober. But then I had to rebuild my business. And so I had to wait long enough. When you're recovering from something like that, people don't want to hear, oh, I've got it this time. They just want to see your action. And so it's how many days have you stacked up? So as the years started to go on, then I had to get back into it. Could I ever convince somebody that I wouldn't relapse? Could I ever convince somebody that I was still relevant? Was I too old? You have to face all those dramatic questions. So you have to be brutally honest with yourself. And so far, I'm still a bun cooking in the oven, but we went back and signed the best player in football and did the biggest contract in history of sports. And I'm working on another project, which is health and wellness. It's all the cutting edge biomed breakthroughs in hyperbaric oxygen, stem cells. It's two brain processes, one called RTMS and the other called NES3 brain training, which can stimulate energy in critical situations in games, recover players much faster, actually cure concussed brains, and for the larger population, make sure that through the concept of neuroplasticity, that your memory stays sharp and your cognitive processing stays sharp. So people your age are going to get the benefit of all this amazing preventative technology. So I've done 200 hyperbaric oxygen sessions or 180 light stem sessions and 85 stem cells. So, I've got a shot, but people your age are going to live to be 120, 130 with sharp brains, and just watch it come. We're going to look at contemporary medicine as if people were cuckoo. You mean that they put poison in people's bodies to cure cancer? Are you kidding me? You're going to tell the stories to your kids. They actually did that. They broke people's chests open to operate on them. No one will believe you.
I was muted. Thank you very much. That was very inspiring and also very profound. I keep being amazed at the experiences that you've lived through. I also wanted to do a little follow-up on that. So do you have any sort of experiences where those, addiction or addictions, they allowed you to sort of step outside of your box, as you were saying at the start, and then something profound showed up? Because like they say, the greatest music, let's say, is composed with some sort of external interference to connect to the universe, let's say.
You mean in my microprocessing with psilocybin and having wonderful expansive thoughts? There is a creative level to anything that releases your mind, but you can do it without using dangerous without doing dangerous drugs. It's creativity. It's the ability to see a larger world and to dream. In other words, I can see that for people your age, the environment would be my major challenge, right? In other words, you're not going to see cars out on the road using a gasoline in 10 or 15 years. You're not going to be able to eat a piece of beef because it would require all this land, and for individual cows, that's not happening. Your world is going to evolve into very wealthy people who have the limited resources and then not enough water, not enough things like that. So if I was back to being 22, I'd be an environmental activist, because it's going to, you can't keep having population keep expanding this way. Our species is in denial about the reality of climate change. It's going to affect every single, my kids, every single person. And the fact that we're not reacting to it doesn't mean it's not here. And it's not the Earth that'll be challenged. The Earth will survive another billions and billions of years. It's our species that we're committing specieside, and no one's noticing. But it's people with your technological skills that got the ability to get us out of it. You'll be the saviors.
I really hope so. Yeah, there is a movie that says "Don't Look Up," precisely about.
Could you believe that? Right? No, but you don't understand. The world's coming to an end. Yeah, but what is Madonna doing? And did she break up with? Is it true that she? Oh, really? I see.
Thank you very much. I'll pass it to the next panelist.
Okay.
Thanks, Artem, and thank you for your responses, Leigh. That's great. Francisca, you are last on our student panel. I know I'm just encouraging other students to add their questions to the Q&A, and I appreciate you rounding us out.
Good evening. I'm so thrilled to be here. I would love to ask you, what are the driving factors that made you create the Steinberg Leadership Institute for students?
So when you're waiting for someone to make a change, as minor as picking up a piece of garbage off the floor, and as major as trying to push back climate change, the tendency is to wait for the amorphous they or them to take the lead, right? In other words, older people, political figures, and all the rest of it. And my father would look at me and he'd say, when you wait for they or them, the amorphous they or them, you could wait forever. The they is you, son. You are the they. And I think for all of us, in other words, I wasn't alive during the Holocaust. I was a teenager during the Civil Rights Movement. But this is our time and our watch. And we're watching skinheads and hate groups in the ascendancy and neo-Nazis. So who's gonna push back on this? It's not to be political, it's obviously not members of the Republican Party. Who's going to push back on this awful stuff that's happening, the shootings and the rest of it? So I created a training program where we took the 30 biggest cities in the country and we trained young people to spot skinheads and hate groups, and to help police departments do intelligence work, and to intervene in crisis situations, and to go into school systems and create programs that promote ethnic tolerance. So instead of being scared of people for your differences, you appreciate the richness. And I'm raising funds right now to do this program again, because we can't simply sit back and allow this hate to take over. I mean, this is our time, this is our watch, and this is our time to fight back. Because if you allow the forces of evil to be unchallenged, then, you know, eventually they win. And what Berkeley taught me was how to use every skill I had, the ability to write, the ability to speak, the ability to organize. And what I really learned that was so invaluable was all sorts of political skills, because all the things that I did on campus, whether I was student body president, undergrad, or law school, was all about people and attitudinal change. It taught me what it was an extension of what my parents taught me, and it taught me how to inspire and change the world. And, you know, everything else you can learn out of a book.
That's very inspiring. I would love to come up with a follow-up question. What will you see yourself doing for the next 5 to 10 years in terms of philanthropical?
In terms of
Philanthropical, like in terms of this kind of like a leadership institute, like how will you support your people in the coming like 5 to 10 years?
So if you take those, the first thing I want to do is push back on the environment. So I'm creating something called a Sporting Green Alliance, which will take sustainable technologies in wind, solar, recycling, resurfacing, and water to stadia, arena, and practice fields to drop carbon emissions and energy costs and transform each of those venues into education platforms. So you walk into a stadia, arena, practice field, and you see a waterless urinal, a solar panel, and you think about how to take those concepts and put them in your own home or business. So we use sports in the forefront of attitudinal change, rolling back climate change. We do Saturday morning comic cartoons with superheroes fighting for the environment. We do comic books. We do nature villages. So that's one thing. The bullying program I talked about, we keep doing. I did a program with Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State, where we went and we demined minefields in Angola, Mozambique, and Cambodia, and we need to do that again because those landmines, which are being laid all over the Ukraine and Russia now, and everywhere else in the world, there's a war. Once the war is over, it takes massive amounts of land and you can't farm them anymore. And then people have their limbs blown off. So we've got lots of causes, Francesca, to try to deal with. And we just got to keep pushing.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your replies. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
You all always have the absolute best questions. And right now, as people are thinking about what they want to put into the Q&A, I just invite, if there are any follow-up questions that the four of you have for Leigh, feel free to ask, or I have one more question that I'm curious about. Arav, Artem, Veda.
Please go ahead and ask your question. I think that sounds good.
Leigh, it has been close to 50 years since you graduated from UC Berkeley. You have given tons of talks to different people in that in-between time. You were here at Cal at an incredibly politically sensitive time. I'm just curious from you, from all the talks, from what you've done, is there a question you wish someone had asked you? And if so, what was that? And would you answer it?
Well, again, what was the most important thing I learned when I was on campus? And people look at the time we were on campus as challenging, because when I was a junior, the first quarter was the School of Independent Studies with a bunch of alternative classes. That ended up with the California Highway Patrol on campus and the campus shut down. And the second was Third World College, and that ended up the same way. And then the third quarter was that. But it was such an exciting time where we were exploring who we were and every bit of literature and every bit else. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. And Berkeley was the center of the student world. And when I was student body president, it's hard to explain. I know this is long ago music, but Jimi Hendrix came by my office, you know, who I know he's retro, but Jim Morrison and the Doors came by my office. It was a
Can you remind
confluence.
everybody who that is? Just in case. I mean, I know who it is, but I don't know if
Best
everybody.
guitar player ever.
Yeah, the biggest figures in rock and roll, the biggest figures in politics, the big Gloria Steinem came by and visited, who was one of the first big feminists. And it was rock music and books and challenging who you were as a human being. It was so exciting to be there. So people think of it the other way, but it was the best place to be in the world if you were a young student. And I never wanted to leave. I mean, I got into Harvard Law School, Yale Law School, all that stuff. No way. I was staying at Berkeley. You would have had to drag me out of there.
How a lot of students are at the point where they're trying to figure out what to do next. I think every generation has kind of what people do, but I'm curious, how did you decide on law? I know you studied political science, but what led you to law?
Well, there was never one point I'd like to make is this. I was always going to be a lawyer. I was brought up to be a civil rights lawyer or a civil liberties lawyer, to fight for the underdog and everything like that. What I never anticipated was representing professional athletes. And I just want to show you how one door closes and the next opens, okay? So when I'm out of law school, I go on a trip around the world. And I'm traveling for about a year in all these different countries. So I jump into the river in the Nile and I get really sick. And when I get to England, I lose about 50 pounds and I weigh 128 pounds when I come back. So I can't take a job with the Alameda County District Attorney. And I have to turn it down so I get my strength back. And that leads to me being available when Steve Bartkowski asked me to represent him. And we create a brand new profession where none existed. Now, that was not what I was going to do. But because I jumped into the Nile and got sick, I couldn't do what I was going to do. And if you'd ask somebody on campus, they would say, oh, he'd be a US senator, he'd be involved, you know, in fighting for justice. It would never be representing athletes. So what I want you all to see is that you may have all great intention to follow this career, this career, this career. Things will happen along the way that will change that. And you have to be open to opportunity, because something that's completely unexpected may happen. And especially in this time, some breakthrough technologically or something will happen that will create brand new professions and brand new alternatives that you can't really anticipate at this exact moment.
One of our students has a question who they wanted us to ask, and that's you were such an activist, an activist always. What would you advise students who are today's student activists? Any certain advice you have for them? You've talked about climate.
You have to think of practical steps that actually make a difference, because protest is fine, but can you think of actual steps to improve a situation? So when I'm talking about supporting Green Alliance, I'm talking about a lot of real estate between if you fly across the country, you'll see a lot of golf courses, a lot of practice facilities, a lot of high school, a lot of college, you'll see things. So think about the actual steps you can take and or do the research into the field and think about what you could actually do as positive change. I mean, you don't protest, you protest to bring attention to something. You don't protest and protest and protest. What are the actual tangible steps that you can take to bring positive change to the world? And how can you practically do that? Complaining about everything, okay, so I think we could all agree on the problems, but what are you going to do to change that?
It's really helpful. It's also interesting right now, we still have a lot of protesting with the grad students protesting the conditions. I think it's down in LA also. So we have one thing that I am curious about. You talked about Barkowski and signing him, but I think students are probably a little bit more familiar with Mahomes. I'm probably not, but you said one thing that was incredible was signing him. I was wondering if you could tell that story. Yes.
Here's Patrick Mahomes. As if you're a Dolphin fan, that's Tua Tagovailoa. So again, the key, how I was able to sign more players in sports than anybody else was what I told you about listening skills, was meeting with the parents and laying out a vision for them, but first listening to who they were and what was important to them. So, for example, I've been pioneer on the concussion issue and trying to bring change to head injuries and dementia and chronic traumatic encephalopathy, but it's listening to who they are and then presenting an organized plan from the day that you would work with an athlete, getting a holistic idea of who they are. Like I said, greatest anxieties and fears, greatest hopes and dreams. How can I fulfill them in their life as they see it? And listening to all that, how can I lay out a vision for how their life can be, which starts with path to the draft for most players and how we're going to get this player drafted. Well, Patrick Mahomes was seen as a second or third round draft pick. He ended up being picked 10th in the first round. So that all worked well. More importantly, we got him to a team with great ownership, great coaching, great front office, with a great supporting cast. So it's not just how high you get drafted, it's are you going to have a successful career? And talk through him being a role model, second career, marketing, every aspect of his life, and put a plan out there to show how every step would go. And they bought into the plan. And no one knew that in his first year of starting, he'd be MVP of the league. And he's probably going to be MVP this year.
Yeah, he seems quite inspirational. Listening is an easy word to say, and it's really hard to do. Do you have any tips for how to be a better listener?
Yes. At this exact moment, I have no idea what time it is. I don't really have, I'm not cognizant of what day it is. I'm not looking at my phone. Matter of fact, I don't even know where my phone is. Every ounce of energy, every bit of focus I have is going into this discussion. When it's time to do the next thing, I'll do the next thing. But if you can put every bit of energy and attention and focus into this moment and not be distracted, not worried about what you're gonna do next, or what you did in the past, or who's texting you, or what's coming over some form of social media, but to be present in this moment, you'll get the most out of every situation. If you're trying to listen, it's not only the words, it's body language, it's text, it's subtext, not simply what they're saying, but what they might be meaning. And you have to put all your focus into this one moment, or you're going to miss it or miss something. And you may look relaxed, but you're paying intense attention to what's happening. And you're not staring off into space. You're not looking down. There's this curious disease that my daughter has with her thumbs, where she's just, but you've got to get into that moment and put all your attention there. When it's time to do the next thing, you can do the next thing and put all your attention into that. But this age of multitasking can destroy attention and attenuate attention span. You've got to be right there. I guarantee you the other person will greatly appreciate it.
Leigh, I cannot think of a better way to kind of leave off with everybody. Right now, as I mentioned, it's exam season, it's the end of the semester. People are trying to do a lot of different things at the same time. But thank you for being present with us. Thank you for this incredible focus. I share at the end of every talk a code for people to use so that we can get feedback in an attempt to listen to everybody. I'm going to do that now. Our code is last one ! Because it is our last class. It's been a true honor to have you with us. I know that's echoed by the rest of the panelists. I don't know if you all would like to say a word. It'd be fitting for you all to have the last word.
For me?
Well, I'm thinking the panelists, but I think everybody's like trying to use their fingers to unmute.
I just like to say that every response you provided was very profound and made me like stare at a wall for a sec. And I think this is very valuable. That means I learned a lot. So thank you for that. True wisdom. Thank you.
Then I'll leave it with Artem and I'll leave it at that. Leigh, thank you. Please let us know really if we can do anything for you. You have been incredibly generous with us.
Oh, I thought the questions were great. The panelists were great. I think this particular group's going to do some amazing things in the world. There were questions about my email. It's Leigh, Leigh, at steinbergspeaks.com. And I'm on all the platforms of social media. You should get on all the platforms, people listening to this, and network. And did I mention network? Bye.
Thank you for the networking. Take care. Thank you all for a great semester. Students, thank you all for really good questions and continued fantastic introduction. I think you can everybody can see the share, the screen, just in case there are any questions. I'll stay on for a moment, but it's been a great semester. I look forward to getting everybody's reflections.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your night, everyone.